All right, we are back to talk about Obsidian plugins again. We got through more than half of our list last time, so we're gonna round this episode out, finish up the list, and maybe hit one of the bigger ones too along the way. But first of all, I'd like to thank our two sponsors for this episode before we get started, and that is Wix and New Relic. How are you doing today, Federico?
I'm doing fantastic, John. Thank you. And yes, we're gonna wrap this up with this gallery of some third-party plugins that we like in Obsidian, that we recommend people using Obsidian. We still are going to do, I think, another episode on a few of the bigger plugins that deserve like a longer conversation, and a longer explanation. Things like Data View and Templater, for example. Those are some really big plugins that you cannot just sum up in 5 minutes. But before we get into the rest of our list, John, I think we should clarify, we should mention, because we kind of took it for granted last time, how to actually install plugins in Obsidian, which can be surprisingly challenging for a lot of people who just discovered the app.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's, one of the things about Obsidian is there's so much out there. You have to wonder sometimes how to find this stuff and where to go. And if you go into the settings for Obsidian, you'll find a section called Community Plugins. And that's where you go in order to find not only what your plugins are that you've got installed, but also to where you can browse ones that have been approved by the community. So this is a subset of all the Obsidian plugins that are available, but you know that at least they've been looked at by the developers of Obsidian and have gotten a thumbs up. So that's a good place to start. If you go in there and click on the browse button, you'll see a long list, and there's different ways to sort it. And you can go through, I think by default, it's sorted by number of downloads, so you get an idea of what the most popular ones are right away. But I go through there periodically and just look to see what's new and read some of the descriptions, because if you click on one of them, you'll get the GitHub page summary for them, because I think they're all hosted on GitHub, aren't they, Federico? I don't think I've ever run into one that's hosted somewhere else.
Yeah, I think community plugins have to be hosted on GitHub. I'm pretty sure, yes.
I think that's how it works. Yeah, so that's one good place to go to find these things. Another one is to subscribe to the Obsidian Roundup newsletter. And that's a newsletter that kind of highlights the happenings in the Obsidian community each week. And usually there's a section on plugins, both updates and new ones. And so that's a good place to go to find them. And then finally, I would say join the Obsidian Discord and look at the forums, because if you go to obsidian.md, you will find links to both of those things there. And that's a good place to see what other people in the community recommend. So those are where I would go to find them. In terms of installing them, if it's a community plugin that's been approved, you can do that right there in the settings of the app. If it's something that is not approved yet, you can still install it, but you will have to you'll have to unzip a zip archive of the files and deposit the folders into a hidden folder in the Obsidian directory. And that is, maybe something you haven't done before. Federico mentioned last week a plugin called Brat, which simplifies this process. I would recommend doing that if you don't want to hassle too much with it. But, on the Mac, you can just show hidden files. I think it's Command-Shift period, and then drag them into the directory that way. But, it's totally fine to just deal with the community ones and not worry about the ones that are outside the community. Because if it's a really good one outside the community, it eventually will find its way into the community plugins, I think. What do you think, Federico?
Yeah, I think that's right. I definitely recommend using Obsidian Brat if you want to install a beta plugin from GitHub that is not available in the community section. I would also mention that in Obsidian settings, in the community plugins section, you can view all of your installed plugins. Mm-hmm. You can search your installed plugins by name. There's a search box that you can use. You can reload all of your installed plugins. So this is useful if maybe you've just installed a plugin manually and you want to make sure that Obsidian reloads and sees the contents of the plugin folder. There's a reload button there. You can also keep a plugin installed but disable it. And you can do this with a toggle that lets you turn it off, right? You can keep a plugin installed maybe because you're waiting for an update, for example, but you can keep it disabled so that it's not actually working in Obsidian. You can also delete a plugin. There's an X button that you can press to delete the plugin and all of its assets. And you can, of course, check for updates to community plugins directly from this page. There's a check for updates button that you can press. You wait a few seconds. Obsidian checks for the latest versions of the plugins, and it tells you, like, you have 2 plugins waiting for updates. And then you can confirm that you want to update them, and all the process will be done in line, and you will get a little notification that says 2 plugins were updated. And I know that I'm sort of cheating here because I think I was supposed to mention this later, but there's no more appropriate place than here to mention this plugin. This is all very meta, so bear with me. There's a plugin to check changelogs for other plugins.
Right.
So this plugin is called Plugin Changelogs. Again, bear with me. It's an Obsidian plugin that lets you see what's new for all the plugins you have installed. So you get this one from the community section. It's called Plugin Changelogs. You install it. And once you have it installed, this plugin adds a little info button. It adds a little lowercase I button to the plugin's screen in settings. You press that button and you can read the changelog. You can see what's changed in the latest version of any plugin that you have installed. Again, because this is based on GitHub, there's even a drop-down that lets you view changelogs for specific versions. You can select, for example, right here, I'm checking out the advanced URI plugin, which we mentioned last time. Mm-hmm. I can click read the changelog and I can choose the version that I want to read. It's very useful if you want to see what is actually new in a plugin without having to manually Google the plugin and find it on GitHub.
Yeah, it is a really nice plugin because that has always been a problem. Some developers...
It's a plugin for plugins.
Right. Some developers will put the changelog right in the description of the plugin, so you'll have that. But I'd say the most of them don't, and having to go to GitHub is a bit of a hassle. So having this button is kind of a nice thing.
Yep.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Wix. Building a successful business online can be challenging. From creating a standout online presence and building a marketing strategy to the technical side of running a website, it's a lot to manage. And that's where Wix comes in. It offers a complete business solution with all of the features you need to create, manage, and grow online. You can build your website exactly the way you want it, with thousands of design features that have been created with your needs in mind. Wix has strong infrastructure in place, providing you with reliable hosting and fast loading times. So as a user, you'll have faster performing websites for your customers anywhere in the world. And to top it all off, you get marketing and business tools built into your website dashboard, making it even easier for you to reach the right audiences. So head on over to Wix.com and join the millions of people growing their businesses online today. Again, that URL is Wix, Wix.com. Our thanks to Wix for their support of the show. All right, why don't we dive into the rest of these? Federico, maybe you could kick things off with Note Refactor, because I think maybe you use this more than I do. I do some, but not a lot.
Yeah, I have used Note Refactor a bunch, and it's the term refactor is very programmer inspired.
It is.
Basically, this is a plugin that lets you repurpose entire notes or portions of a note into other notes. Essentially, you can use this plugin 2 ways. I would describe it as such. You can select some text in a note and say, okay, this selection should become a separate note. Or you can place the cursor somewhere in the body text of a note and you can say, split this file here. Right. So what is on top remains a separate note. What is below the cursor should be split into a separate file in my Obsidian Vault. I personally have used the selection method a lot, which I really love, because sometimes I'm working on a story and I'm writing a story in Obsidian and it's a single note. And the story, gets longer than I anticipated. So what I can do with Note Refactor is I can select a section of an article that I'm writing, the body text and maybe even the heading. Maybe it's like an H2 heading, for example. I can select all that text and I can say Note Refactor. I don't remember. What is the command is called extract selection to new note. First line as file name. And I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It takes the selection from the note, makes it into a separate note, and it uses the first line of the selection as the new note's name.
Yep.
And as a bonus, it drops an inline link to the newly created note right underneath the cursor. So if you're working on a long note, if you have a long draft and you want to refactor sections of that note into standalone files, it becomes a very easy way to put together a quick table of contents, right? Because you can select, make into a separate note, drop a link into the current existing note that I have.
That's a very good idea. I hadn't really thought of it doing it that way with things, with articles that I'm writing. I think I've used it most in the same way that you do with the selection method, but it tends to be if I'm in another note, especially something like my dashboard, which I want to keep kind of compact, and I'm making an outline for some project that we're working on, and I realize, I've just written, like 20, 30 lines of text that really need to be their own separate note, but I still want them referenced in my dashboard. That's what I do, because I'll split it out into a separate note, but I'll have that link back right there in the dashboard by using Note Refactor. And what's interesting about Note Refactor is that this plugin existed. Then the developers of Obsidian built in similar features into Obsidian itself as a core plugin. But Note Refactor still gives you a lot more options because it lets you do things like define what the file names are going to be based on variables like the time and other values. I know, and that I think is really good for, especially if people are using. A lot of people like to date their notes and have dates all over Obsidian, and so having that template feature is a good way to do that. All right, Federico, I talked about periodic notes a little bit last time in the context of Calendar, and this is by the same developer as Calendar, and it's the functionality that started in Calendar as a way to create daily notes. So what you can do with periodic notes, and it ties in with the Calendar plugin, is you can click on a day in the calendar and create a daily note, or you can click on the week number and create a weekly note that way. It also offers monthly, quarterly, and annual notes. All right. So there are lots of different options here. And this works really well if you have some sort of GTD type system where you're doing, you're taking notes in your daily notes and you're doing reviews on a periodic basis, whether that's weekly, monthly, quarterly, etc. So it can be used for that sort of thing. The way I use it is really just with the weekly notes, which is when I have a week where I feel like I have a lot of different projects that I have to work on, I will often open up a weekly note and link it back to my dashboard, because it's the same sort of concept as I was just talking about with Note Refactor, where I don't want to have like hundreds and hundreds of words, and jumping back and forth between an article I'm writing, something I'm doing for the club, and maybe, 2 or 3 other things. Instead, I'll go into that weekly note and I'll just kind of use it as a really high overview to keep me organized. It's not like a task list, because that all kind of lives in my task manager, but it is a little bit of a roadmap of here are the most important things I need to work on this week. And maybe here are a few notes of things that are happening that I want to remember, because I have to put the project down and switch over to something else because of a deadline or something else that's going on. So that's how I use it. Have you tried this one at all?
No, because I'm not really into the calendar plugin or the periodic notes or using dates like that. But I know that lots of people are, so I'm glad that you mentioned this one. Not really the way that I like to work. I really like to use my dashboard without any sort of like, naming notes based on dates and times. It doesn't really work for me. And I should also add, for context, because lots of people ask me, for the same reason, I am really not into like the daily note practice. I know that it works really well for a ton of people. It just doesn't work with the way that my brain thinks. And I have the same problem in similar tools like Craft as a daily note mode,
Right.
Agenda famously as
Note Plan works that way, I think, too.
Note Plan, Agenda, all these tools that have a daily note sort of workflow or component, I struggle with it. But the beauty of Obsidian, in this case, you can just not use the plugin or turn it off, and you're never going to see that functionality.
Yeah,
So,
I think the thing with daily notes, too, is it's one of those things that I think that it comes with a lot of baggage, and it can kind of tie you down that way where you feel like there's a special way you're supposed to be doing this. Personally, I've tried it. It hasn't stuck with me either, but I used it for a while as a way to keep like a clipboard that was a dated clipboard. So it was easy for me to go back and find the little snippets of things I wrote down and then consolidate them somewhere else later. And, if it was something that had to be saved versus deleted. But, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to use this stuff. But if you do, but it does, as you said, work for a lot of people really well. So this plugin in particular is one that you should take a look at if you're interested in that.
So I mentioned plugin change logs already. John, can you tell me about Quick Switcher Plus and how do you use it?
All right. So we've talked about the Quick Switcher in the main app, which defaults to Command O. It's a way to pull up a text field, you start typing, and it filters based on what you're typing so you can open up one of your notes. Quick Switcher Plus goes beyond what that does because that built-in functionality is really just searching the titles. What this does is it allows you to search the headings, links, embedded notes, which is the transclusion thing that I think we've talked about a little bit, and tags. So if you have a note that's really long, for instance, I'm thinking of something like Federico's review. Assuming if you had your iOS review all in one text file, as opposed to splitting it up like you do, you might want to be able to quickly get to a particular heading in that review by using the Quick Switcher, hitting Command O, and then searching for a heading, a title of one of the chapters in that review instead of just searching for the review title itself. Now, this isn't one I've used a lot. I don't use tags, so I don't use the tag functionality, but it can be handy if you have longer notes to be able to pull up the headings. It does by H1, H2, H3, and on down the row.
Interesting. So it can search headings and it can search embeds.
Yes, and because typically, I think normally the way embeds work is that they don't come up in search results, except in their original note, not in the note in which they're embedded. So I think that this would allow you to find embeds in where they're embedded as opposed to their original note.
All right, I will have to check it out again then. Okay, I want to mention, so this one, recent files.
Mm-hmm.
This is another one of those things that you can accomplish in a variety of ways in Obsidian. And I also have, I don't know that you do as well, there's another way to do this than using a plugin. But if you want to see a log of like a list of your recently modified files from all across your vault in Obsidian, there's a plugin called Recent Files for Obsidian. It's very, quite the original name, but basically this adds a tiny clock icon in the Obsidian sidebar. I believe it's called the left ribbon. I believe that UI element is officially called the ribbon. Okay. It's basically the tiny thin sidebar on the left of the app. It adds an icon there, and you will probably see other icons in there. That's because plugins can put these buttons in the left sidebar. This one, you click it and you can view a section of the Obsidian sidebar that has a list of your recently modified files, which can be really handy if you're editing multiple notes at a time, or if you're jumping from one note that is stored in a folder to another that is in a different folder, and you're modifying both at the same time, and then you want to have a quick way to instantly navigate back to those documents. This sort of plugin can be really useful because it basically integrates with the file manager in the sidebar to allow you to view all of these recently modified files. It's also nice because it means you can keep the file explorer displaying your folders and files alphabetically, but then if you want to view them by modified date, you can use this plugin to get that done. However, and this is something that I mentioned in Mac Stories Weekly last Friday, this is also the sort of thing that you can get done with DataView. DataView is an incredible plugin that we're going to cover separately here on App Stories. I started covering DataView last week on Weekly with my first deep dive into the incredible world of DataView snippets. Essentially, DataView is a plugin that lets you drop these little snippets of code anywhere in a note. And when you render the note, so whether you use live preview or, broadly speaking, when you switch from editing mode to preview mode, those code blocks become tables. Like they become these rich tables that can filter and query your Obsidian database based on a variety of filters. One of the implementations of DataView that is really popular is putting together a table showing your most recently modified files. I've been using this for months. In my dashboard note, there's a little section that is a DataView code snippet. And when I preview the dashboard, that snippet becomes a table that shows me the 6 most recently modified notes from my entire vault. And that is that is one of the default DataView implementations. It's one of the, I think it's one of the more popular snippets that a ton of people use. Of course, there's a ton more that you can get done with DataView, but one step at a time. We'll talk about that eventually.
Yeah, and I actually have it implemented a little bit differently because you can make tables with DataView, but you can also make lists. And so I actually have a link to a separate document, which is simply a list of those files. And so I have a longer list of the 30 most. And it's worth mentioning with this particular plugin that it doesn't sync across devices. So if you're moving between a lot of devices, you won't find the most recently modified documents from your Mac on your iPad, I don't think. That's one reason I'm using DataView, because that kind of crosses various devices. But I do use recent files because if I'm on my Mac all day and I'm editing a bunch of different documents, this is a great way to quickly jump back to them, as Federico said. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by New Relic. If you're a software engineer, you've been there. It's 9 p.m., you're finally unwinding from work, but then your phone buzzes with an alert. Something's broken, and your mind's already racing at what could have gone wrong. Is it the back end or the front end? Is it global? Is it a server? What could it be? Now the whole team is scrambling from tool to tool and messaging person after person to find and fix the issue. That won't happen if you get New Relic. New Relic combines 16 different monitoring products that you'd normally buy separately. So engineering teams can see across their entire software stack in one place. More importantly, you can pinpoint issues down to the line of code, so you know exactly why the problem happened and can resolve it quickly. That's why the dev and ops teams at DoorDash, GitHub, Epic Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. Whether you run a cloud-native startup or a Fortune 500 company, it takes just 5 minutes to set up New Relic in your environment. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen again. Get New Relic before it does, and you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free forever. No credit card required. Sign up now at newrelic.com/appstories. That's NEWRELIC.com/appstories. One more time, newrelic.com/appstories to take advantage of this fantastic deal. Our thanks to New Relic for their support of the show. All right, I've got one for you, Federico, that I think that you are going to be skeptical about, which is called RSS Reader. It's very descriptive.
I am very skeptical of this one, yes.
All right. This actually creates an RSS client in your right sidebar for Obsidian. Now, I'm not going to try to convince you that you should switch all your RSS into Obsidian, because this is not the place to read RSS as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's fine. I mean, it gives you markdown style versions of everything that's delivered via RSS, but it's not particularly fast. The feeds don't refresh nearly as fast as other clients that I've used. But I have one very specific, unique use case for it that I found handy, which is I keep the Mac Stories feed in that right sidebar, and it just makes it easy when I'm working on something. If I need to grab a link of an article that we've published recently, instead of going out to Safari, finding the article and copying the URL, I can simply drag it out of the sidebar from the RSS feed. It's my repository. It's my reference.
Wait a second. So that those articles, are they notes in your vault, or are they just like links displayed in the site? Like, does it create files for each article?
It does not create files. No, it does not. You can display them in there and you can save them that way, but it does not by default do that. So for me, it's a reference guide essentially to everything that we publish. And I don't use it a lot, but it's just nice to have it there. And I have it set up to, I think, refresh about once an hour, which is more than enough for most of the ways I use it. It's not the way, like I said, this is not how I'm going to read the web. I mean, if I had my 200 RSS feeds in Obsidian, it would be a disaster, but it works pretty well for what I'm using it for. Now, so if there's any feed out there that you want to keep an eye on periodically, I think this is a pretty good way to do it.
Interesting. I don't know why I thought it was creating notes for each article in the background all the time. I guess I checked out the documentation and I was confused, because there is a template syntax. I guess the template syntax is for when you want to create an article out of an RSS item.
Yes. So one of the things that I've been toying with using this for is when we create our list of previously published articles for Mac Stories Weekly, with that templating system, I can just select a bunch of articles and quickly generate it in exactly the format that I need. So, it's things like that. Now, that's super specific to what I do, but if there is a feed, especially if it's not like a super high volume feed that you want to keep an eye on, it's a good way to do it, I think.
Interesting. All right. I will probably have to check this out. So next plugin in the list, I cannot mention this one because it's a secret.
It's a secret. I thought maybe
it's a teaser. It's all right. It's a teaser. There's one that we cannot cover, but hopefully very soon. Simple Embeds. I love this one. So Simple Embeds, created by Club Mac Stories member Sam Warnick. This is an excellent plugin. So Simple Embeds, it easily creates iframe-based embeds in Obsidian, and it works by just dropping a link in one of your notes. So let me contextualize here. Obsidian, when you switch to preview mode, or again, if you use live preview, it can render iframes, so basically portions of web pages in line as HTML alongside the rest of a note. Typically, you would do this by actually dropping the full-on iframe syntax in HTML in Obsidian, which works for sure, but it's not ideal because it's kind of ugly, and you're seeing this giant iframe syntax in the body of a note. It's really not that elegant. Simple Embeds, as the name suggests, it's basically like a one-liner. You just drop, say, a YouTube link or a Twitter link, like just the link in a note. And when you render the note, when you switch to preview mode, that link becomes an embed. So for YouTube links, it becomes an embedded player. For Twitter links, it becomes an embedded tweet. I believe the plugin even works with Apple Music. I want to
Does it?
say,
It's not in the. It's not in the
did.
settings. It's not in the settings. I don't think. And I was just going to say I'd like
It's
it
not
to.
in the settings.
No.
Oh, let me see. What was it then? So let me check out the. Oh yes, sorry. So the plugin works with Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I don't know what Note Fight is. There's
No.
yeah. So I believe Apple Music was one of my feature requests to send. That's why I was confused. But yeah, it's Sam is constantly working on this one, and it's specifically like if you're the kind of person who is saving a ton of links to interesting tweets or interesting videos on YouTube, this is like a must-have because it makes it so much easier to have those embeds in Obsidian. Like you can watch YouTube videos inside of Obsidian with this plugin. If you use simple embeds, you just need to drop a link without having to worry about putting together the iframe code. So I really like this one.
I would love to see this come to all of the Apple content because Apple uses in its marketing pages, it uses iframes for music, for apps, and for podcasts. I think they do it for TV and movies too. So it could. I don't know. I don't know if the format of those are all the same across all those different kinds of media. But Sam, you got a number. Your second feature request from me on that. That would be fantastic. All right, yeah. Federico. Let's keep moving here. We've got, all right, we should talk about Workbench. And this is one of those, again, very meta type of plugins where if you have an awful lot of notes and you find yourself moving between them and combining them and gathering bits of information from multiple places and creating new notes from things that already exist, you might want to look at Workbench because what it allows you to do with some commands is to quickly, for instance, highlight something in a note and either embed or move it into another note. And I think one of the best use cases for this is probably research. If you have a lot of research files and you want to bring snippets of those research notes into a central location to kind of organize them and gather your thoughts, Workbench works really well for that. You designate your Workbench file. That can be something called Workbench if you want it to be, or it could be your dashboard note, or it could be any note really. And then when you use these commands, it will deposit bits of the files into this particular note. Is that a fair summary of it, Federico? I don't use this one a ton,
yeah, I think so.
But I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think so. This is like this is a sort of the plugin version of what I've been doing with my dashboard note and Quick Add. It's I think it's an easier and more integrated way to capture all sorts of information from across your vault using a single plugin and using a bunch of different commands. And it's very popular. I believe Workbench is made by Ryan Murphy.
It is. Excellent
plugin developer and excellent really awesome figure in the Obsidian community. So it's a very useful plugin. I used it this summer. Ever since then, I switched to my own sort of custom-made system with the dashboard and Quick Add and all my shortcuts. But check it out because I think this is one of it's one of those plugins that can only exist in Obsidian. If you know what I mean, like it takes advantage of all the things that makes Obsidian great, like the internal links and linking to sections, linking to headings, that sort of stuff. John, I want to wrap this up with a mention of Workspaces Plus. So let's start from the basics, Workspaces. So in Obsidian, there's a core plugin called Workspaces that allows you to save any combination of notes as a workspace. So let's say, for example, that you have a note called shopping list and another called shopping research. And you always open those two notes together, side by side. It's something that you do on a regular basis. Usually you do this by manually opening those notes and then splitting the screen to open the second one. With workspaces, you can make those two notes into a workspace so that you can save it. It's like a preset for your notes, right? So you can save that workspace, and then you can close those notes. And at any point in the future, when you want to use that workspace again, you can invoke the workspace manager and you can load that workspace again. And it opens those two notes in the same spot with the same configuration, with the same layout. Workspaces are one of my absolutely favorite features in Obsidian. It's something that I would like to have, honestly, everywhere on my iPad. Like, I would like to have a workspace mode for multitasking, for my favorite combinations of apps that I use on a regular basis. I would love to have workspaces in reminders, in notes, in Safari. Well, Safari you kind of can with tab groups,
Right.
but basically workspaces are one of the features that make Obsidian, really. Now, Workspaces Plus is like an enhanced version of the Workspaces functionality in that it takes your existing workspaces and it adds features to the Workspace Manager. For example, you can load a specific workspace with a hotkey. With the regular Workspaces plugin, if you want to switch workspaces, you got to go through a list. Like there's a dialog that comes up and you need to pick the workspace you want to open.
Right.
With Workspaces Plus, you can assign a command to a specific workspace. So for example, in my case, I can hit Control D and that opens my dashboard in preview mode. Or I can press Control Option K and that loads my Kanban board for all the stories that I'm working on, and so forth. Additionally, Workspaces Plus shows you a little UI indicator in the Obsidian status bar on desktop so that you can see the workspace that is currently active. And there's even a beta mode in settings that you can enable that is called Workspace Modes. Workspace Modes, it basically, in addition to storing a workspace, it also stores data and preferences for your Obsidian editor settings, your files and links settings, and even your appearance preferences.
Oh, interesting.
Basically, Workspaces Mode is a way to use Obsidian with different settings without having to switch to a different vault. That would be the way that so let's say, for example, that you want to switch between Obsidian that is light and uses minimal theme and uses SF Mono as a font, but sometimes you also want to use the same Obsidian vault with a dark UI, with a different theme, and with a different font. With this beta feature of Workspaces Plus, you can do that.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that existed, and I've been using Workspaces Plus for a while now. I like it because it also makes it very easy to save the workspaces. That you can click on that UI that you mentioned in the status bar and very quickly save what you've got as either a new workspace or an existing one, so they can be constantly updated as your workspace kind of evolves as you work on a project. And I probably have right now 4 or 5 of them. I have a couple I probably have to delete. But just yesterday, I was working on something that for the club, and I had 3 or 4 different panes open, and they were all documents that are scattered all over the place. And I thought, I don't want to. I need to do something else. What am I going to do? Obviously, I created a workspace with that, and I did it really quickly with Workspaces Plus, so that when I'm ready to go back to it, I can just open that up, and I've got everything exactly the way it was when I left off yesterday. And in the meantime, I moved on to some other document and worked on that. So it's fantastic for that sort of thing. All right, Federico, that's a good place to stop. As we mentioned at the top, we are going to revisit Obsidian at least once more, covering things like data view, templater, and quick add. Those are all more involved plugins that are going to take a little time. So we wanted to give them special treatment. So we'll come back to those. But check these out, and check out some of the sites that we mentioned at the top for finding plugins. We'll have links in the show notes to all that. You can, in the meantime, find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.